So today we're going to talk about code coverage. So if you're new to the stream or the videos, you can see what I've been working on at github.com/jguadagno/contacts. I've been pretty much following the file in there called outline. Walks through each of the different steps, each of the videos that you'll find on Twitch and or YouTube. You can click on a link and get access to the code. As we walk through building out this application, I've been posting each video along with the reference to the code, mainly the git commit ID that's happened for that build. So we started off with a quick introduction to some IDEs. We then built our models, built out our business layer, manager layer / service layer. I should probably rename that to service layer. And then we built out our database, connected SQLite to it, and a framework core, and then did some migrations. And in part two, we kind of tied it all together. And then we worked on adding unit tests to the project using XUnit. So we only tested one class, and we'll go through and look at the overall impact of that one class. Right afterwards, we went and added in dependency injection. This was to set us up easier in the future and also to avoid some testing issues when we are testing, like things like inserting and deleting. We were actually going to the database and inserting and deleting. So we took all that out and replaced it with mocks. So today we are going to talk about code coverage. So what is code coverage, you may be asking yourself? I would say if you find an answer to that, let me know. Let's take a look at our overall code structure right now. We consist of 6 different classes: contacts.console, data, data SQL, domain, logic, and logic test. Our console app was a temporary application that we built to validate that our database and everything was working before we added the unit test to the project. We then built out a data repository layer, and then in order to use the database repository layer, we added something that actually connects to the database. And the two parts that do all the work really are the logic part, which has something in here called a contact manager. The contact manager is what goes out to the repository and says, get me contacts, save contacts, delete contacts, etc. And then we built out a series of unit tests to do this. Our unit tests should cover everything that is inside of the repository. Hey, nice emoji, Sam. Did we ever come up with the name for the chicken? I don't remember what we called it. I know for a while it was called the code chicken, but I don't know if there's an actual name for it. So here we're going to take a look at to see if we actually have true code coverage. Depending on your discipline, you'll hear different things like should have 100% of your code covered throughout your application. Others will say that's a fake, you should only have like 80%. Your coverage may vary. The key thing that I always tell my engineers and others is test what you think is important. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should skip all the coded chicken. Like, I got to get some kind of name for ours. We actually use a chicken at work. We don't have a name for it. You know those squeaky toy chickens? Actually, let me find it. Where is it? Squeaky chicken. And let's look on YouTube. So it's these little bad boys. You squeeze them, they make noise. We use them during our planning weeks, and we normally go out and hand them away. We have a golden chicken, aka MVP award, that I give out at work for the people, the team member that everyone agrees was the best team member of the release. So our releases are typically a quarter, so each of the team members within our team votes for the who and the why, and then we take the one with the most votes and give them the golden chicken award. You usually get a chicken like this, then there's a trophy that goes with it, but we've never named it. We actually don't have any ideas how it came into existence. It was at a meeting one day and someone squeezed it, and then it kind of just randomly kept showing up. Nowhere near as cool as the Kendo UI coated chicken, but one day it'll get there in its fame. Believe it or not, there are tons of songs with this chicken where it just squeaks to the music. Anyway, enough with the chickens. This, we want to validate that our code is tested, and we have enough tests to comfortably say our code is working. So if you tuned in to Tuesday's stream or looked at the code from Tuesday, you know we did a bunch of refactoring and took out what was the context data, now is context data.SQLite, put it into its own library, and then refactored the contact repository to pretty much just call whatever the repository is. And the main goal of that was when we actually start pushing this live, we're probably not going to use SQLite as the backend database. We'll probably use a SQL Server or maybe AWS Aurora. This gives us the flexibility to say, here, go use this database for it, or here, go use this data store. And it's key to a quote-unquote properly designed architecture to allow that flexibility. So we built that flexibility in. But how do I know that it actually worked? We created a bunch of unit tests around it to make sure it worked. So if I go and do a run all, I should get the unit test explorer popping up. It hasn't run yet, but you'll get a little green bar here that tells me if they've all run. Probably should have ran it once just prior to make sure it worked. Then we got the latest build. Actually, it might have worked, unless it's still building. 1609. Oh, yeah, it did build. Build and ran. That was quick. It probably because nothing's changed in the build since last time. Actually, no, you see the little question marks here, and I need to find a way to zoom in easier on my Mac. If I click play, it's going to go through. Now I get the little green squiggly. They all turn to playing, and now it's success. So last test was successfully run. I know that everything was hunky-dory and working the way as intended. But how do I truly know that it was, that I tested everything? These are the tests I created, which, if I remember correctly, was somewhere around 15, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, where I could have just scrolled up and looked and not counted. There's 17 tests created, but how do I really know that all those 17 tests were effective? So luckily, Writer has something built in. If you're using Visual Studio has something built in that's around code coverage. There's also a lot of third-party tools that do it. Since I'm using Writer for this, we'll use the Writer one. So instead of clicking on the double plus button here, which says run all tests, I can go and click on cover all tests. What this runs is a tool in the Windows world that JetBrains created called .cover, which will go, essentially it watches your code base as you're executing tests and seeing if every one of the lines are hit. And we'll see a good illustration of that in a second. So I click cover all tests. Right now it's showing that they are all red right here, and then some of them move to green. So we'll see in the important areas of our application. Let's see, how do I zoom in on a Mac easily? I can't tell if it's really good quality. You can see it or not. Sam, how's it look on your end? Can you kind of see that unit test thing? On my Streamlabs, it's super tiny, so I don't know if you're getting the full effect of it or not. Control key, oh, 2 keys, let's see. No, it doesn't work. I thought there was a zoom command built in, which is why I never bothered adding one. Oh well. Hopefully you can see it. Let me just go and full screen this bad boy. Yeah, it looks readable. Well, I know I could bump up the font at least a little bit, make it easier. As I keep going back and forth between working on the stream and not working on the stream, there's no easy way to switch here. So let's go to editor. Actually, it's appearances. Set to 12 point. Let's set it to 16 point. Click save. There it goes. That should be a little bit better. Hopefully it's not too big. So here you see we have, of all the lines of code, there are 336 of 566 lines that were covered, so, which translates to 40%. What that means is it doesn't count things like if we're looking to the left, it's not counting line 143 or 142 because those are no executable portions. It's really counting line 144, 145, 146, 147, skipping over 148, 149, and then 150. And a way you can tell that is here on this side, there are these little green bars. So we got this part right here, this part right here that tells us we ran a unit test and it actually passed. We get a check mark. If you notice when we were building out the unit test before, there might have been a blue question mark, which means test hasn't run, so it doesn't know, or the red do not enter sign, which indicates that the test was run, but it failed. Then we have these little green lines here that indicate whether it's covered or not. And you can hover over it and it'll tell you that one test was passed on that line. And then as you go through each, it tells you what that section of code was. This one's a little bit bigger because technically line 145 takes up 2 spaces. You can also double check by clicking on expanding the tree for that library. They're all sorted by library like you see in the Solution Explorer over here, and then give you the different classes and methods in there, and then the overall coverage. So here we can see our contact repository, or our constructor for the contact manager, has 0 lines that are uncovered of 4 total. Our contact list has no lines that are uncovered of the 3, and if I double click on one, I can actually see what it is. We got 3 lines here. All the scenarios are caught. If we look at something like get contacts, you'll notice if I hover over the get contacts, it says there are 3 tests passed. That's because there are 3 individual tests that execute against this method. Those 3 tests, one should be for this, one should be for this, and then one is the overall success. So I have a test to validate that the first name is not null. a test to validate that the last name is not null, and then a test to make sure the get contacts work. And you can validate that by clicking right here. And then it shows you the 3 tests that are executed. If I click on any one test, I can see the result of it. If I double click on it, it takes me to that test and shows me the results of the test. So according to the current test suite we have 100% code coverage, which means every single line of code that we wrote in the contact manager has a test to validate that it's working. And one thing I want to clarify is just because you have a test, just because it passed, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bug-free application or flawless, or that it actually does what it's supposed to do. I'll give you a great example I noticed in one of my other projects yesterday. So if we look at, where is it? Oh, it's not in this project. Let's say for here, we have a business validation rule that birth date has to be greater than today, or sorry, shouldn't be greater than today's date, meaning you don't want to put a contact in here that was born in the future. Just a rule for this. What if I accidentally did this, and then in my test I was really validating. It's a little bit hard to do that one because of the way I have the test set up. But let's say I was showing the test to do it. All the tests really tell you is that you validated what you thought was correct based on the current code that's in there. So how do we tell? What do we do about these other cases, like our domain class that is 61% code coverage, overall 28%? There are 4 whole classes here that are not covered at all. And again, what that means is that we ran our test, nothing popped up as a result of running those tests. So there was no reference to address in here, address type, phone number, or phone number type. So we can go and start creating tests to get to the code coverage for that. In our particular case, we actually didn't write any contact manager rules to save the address or save phone number or retrieve that, or take care of that in a future build. More concerned with the 61% here is that we only have 61% of the stuff tested. So you see here, I called the address set. So I'm setting an address once, or at least once in my scripts, but I'm nowhere am I retrieving it, so it doesn't know if the get works. And I got to imagine the same thing's true with the phones. Same thing is not true for the middle name, image URL, and full name. So those aren't being tested at all. Full name actually has 6 different things. So if we go and look at the full name property, there's a bunch of rules in here. We have nothing to validate that the full name is working. Now there's a couple of shortcuts that you can do to kind of get 100% code coverage. Again, the goal is to not make sure that you have 100% code coverage, but making sure you test the right pieces of your code. So if I look at the addresses get method, It's just returning the get of the list of average addresses, which that's native .NET code that should work. The same thing with the image URL. The get set for that should work. I have no special rules around it. I don't really care about testing it. If you want to exclude that from coverage, there is an attribute you can use. I think it's called exclude from code coverage. Now if I run that, I should get that this is, I'm not sure if I actually get this is excluded or not. Let's just run it to double check. I think it comes up as 100%. Nope, it doesn't even show up in the list because I don't care about it. And I can do the same thing for middle name if I want. So I can do exclude from code coverage because I don't really care about that. Normally for domain models or business models, depending on how you call them, that is usually done at the root level. I'm not doing it in this particular case because we have some rules here that I want to validate. But for the addresses, since I don't believe, there are no special rules here, I'm going to add exclude from code coverage here, add it here. Come on. And then here. And then one more for here. Okay, so now if I run through all my tests, the domain should get close to 100%. I still have addresses, which is broken, and phone that's broken in the contact type. So you can go through and do exclude from code coverage here, and then exclude from code coverage here. And again, do what you want with it. I'm doing it here more so for the illustration that we want to get for at least the domain covering all the important parts. So right now we're at 74%, and we have to essentially write 6 unit tests to validate that all of our logic inside of this full name is working. I wonder if there's a tool to do it. Oh look, there's a exclude from all code coverage I could have done. I was hoping that I could have just click on here and do create unit tests for it, but I cannot. So let's go here, and we are going to create some unit tests for that. So I'm going to need 6. We'll start off with the first one and then probably just copy and paste. So if we looked at our naming standard, public void, what you're doing, and then what condition. So I'm just going to copy this down here for reference, but we are going to change it. So let's do get contact. Or we're going to do get contact full name. And then with, let's go, I'm going to close this and minimize you for a little bit. And let's put our contact domain object up on the screen at the same time so we can look at the code that we're going to write tests for. This is typically a no-no. you want to write your unit test based off of the requirements, but since I don't have a requirements document in front of me or a TFS story or Jira task, I'm gonna have to cheat and look at what the code does. So let's go back to my test here. And then we are going to, first one is if the first name is not empty and the last name is not empty and middle initial is not empty, it should return this. So we're going to do with all names null should return error string. We could return an actual exception from here. I typically don't in getters and setters. So we're going to look at that code and change it. So we want the arrange and then the act and then the assert. So arrange, let's set up a contact. So we're going to do var contact equals new contact. And for simplicity's sake, I am going to call out all the fields and then we will just treat them as possible. So we got first name equals Joseph. Middle name equals null. And then last name equals Guadagno. And if you look at this code, you think I'm very self-censored. I use the same name for everything, usually my first last name. But it's part of brand awareness, right? So now I'm going to get act. I want to check out what the full name is because there's no database saves or anything here. It's just something that's generated. Equals contact dot full name, and then I want to assert, and then I'm going to steal this. Dot equal comma full name. That's it. So if I run this, one, our test should pass, and then we should get one more upgrade on the overall code coverage. And we got 67, so we only have 2 uncovered lines. Since that hit all of this, it didn't cover every single combination. In theory, I can go and add a line or not. And I'm getting red here. Oh, my test actually failed. Could not determine the name of the contact. Oh, that's because this test is invalid. And this goes back to the point of our test doesn't necessarily indicate that everything you have is working. And here's our little you failed test. So let's do cover of that. And now it passed because I passed in the correct data point. So let's go and copy this out, only because I don't feel like typing. Get contact with null middle name should return string. I'm not gonna put the full string. I could do should return string. I could do string with first name and last name. I get super verbose, but I'll do it anyway. Joseph Guadagno. And if I did the formatting right, there you go. There's a little sensitivity here. You get a little zoomed in syntax. So if I start the line from there, I keep clicking on it. So this should return Joseph Guadagno. Now, really what I should be doing is not validating that, but copying what this string is. Because if I go and change here, I have to do it. So the arrange should really be something like first name bar first name equals Joseph var last name equals Guadagno var middle name equals null. Oh, why is that? Oh, doesn't know. So let's do these as string, 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 and then writer is going to complain that ultimately it's going to complain that it should be a constant. And then I should do one more constant, expected full name equals, and in this case I want to test that it's going to equal first name space last name. And then this should be first name, this should be middle, this should be last, and then here this should be expected. Now doing it this way is a little bit clearer. Now, since I'm testing the same thing, I could in theory replace all of this with null, null, and then whatever this string is here. And now it is and I can get rid of all these now. Now they're the same. The only thing I did was change the test criteria. And this is in a light blue because it's telling me that it's always null, but I know I always want it to be null in this case. And now I have this test here, and this is going to tell me it's always null. Now if I run all my unit tests and run the coverage, I should get 2 out of 6. Cover all test. I got them all. So here it says I got them all. I'm covering 100%, but in honesty, I know I'm not covering 100% of it. Even though it's 6 lines, it just meant that this line was returned. It didn't really check this case here where it's middle, if I change this line to something like if string dot is null or empty, middle name, and then return, what is it? If middle name is null, return this one. Otherwise, I can do an else here. Otherwise, I want you to return this. With writer, it's going to tell me that I want to consolidate this, convert it overall to a return statement. I can also get rid of that and do this. Writer is smart enough to know that there's two returns and then there's a true false. Now if I run it, you'll see that my code coverage is going to be different. So it's not 100% foolproof way to cover it because it didn't go through both of those conditions, nor did it really go through the three conditions here with first name, middle name, and last name. It just knows that this line, this condition was hit and something was covered in there. Now if I do this, I'm missing one additional test because I didn't do the other tests. So I would feel more comfortable doing this. Copy, paste with all names not null. Should return with first name, middle name, and last name. So now I have to fix this here. Let's give it a middle name and then put the middle name in here. Now if I run this, I should have up to the full code coverage for that class. And voila, I'm at 100% code in my domain class. All the fields I care about or properties are covered, so that's good. The logic, which is the more important one, everything is covered 100%. So then we look at the others, the data, the console, and the SQLite, whether they're covered or not. I can close you for now. So if we go and look at it, this is where there are lots of different schools of thoughts. If you recall from the very beginning of this stream/video, we mocked out the repository. So if I look at, and sorry Sam if you're still listening, I didn't use Telerix mock product, I use MOQ for it. We mocked out the repository, which means we're actually not really calling the repository. So we're not calling any of these lines of code. So until the mocking is there, we are not gonna, or unless we get rid of the mocking, we are not gonna get 100% code coverage in there. So you can do two different things. You can start creating what's called a integration test, where it actually goes and writes back and forth to the database, which maybe want to do, maybe don't want to do. It just depends on your scenario. I typically don't, because we're not validating that the database is working. We assume it is. If you have any kind of exception handling where database connection is not there, or invalid credentials or something like that, they still really shouldn't be tested in the repository level. In most cases, you should be validating that any consumers, in our case, the contact manager, can handle those appropriately. And if we look at our repository, there's no specific code in here. It's just saying, hey, go do this work. In this case, the SQL data store. And if we look at the SQL data store, there are only 2 checks in here. We don't actually have to execute these. I can actually take these out. But again, those are business rules. The business rules should be handled further up the food chain. There's no real unit test for, so we don't have to worry about it. So with most things, we typically just do the exclude from code coverage here and the exclude from code coverage here. But your mileage may vary, and I have to reformat this document because it's going to bother me. There you go. So now everything should be fully covered except for our console application. So let's go and validate that. It ran. Why did this not go? Oh, there's the context and the migrations I forgot to do. I don't know if there's a way to do it on the whole assembly. You have to do it on a class by class basis. So let's go in here and add to you the excludes. And then I'd have to do it for each of these. And then for this, there are 2 files here. There are 2 classes here. Tricky. Oh, because it's partial. Copy and pasted. Now if I run it, it's 0. Again, your mileage may vary. You may want to do this. You may not want to do this. I typically have it done for all the classes that I care about, and I don't want to end up an engineer coming saying, why is the context.data not having code coverage? They open up the class, they can look and see we explicitly excluded it because there's no sense in it. And this initial create is a great example. This is generated code by any framework. I don't need to test it. It's been hopefully thoroughly tested by Microsoft, and we actually already proved that it worked. So the last class we have that we have to consider is our console application. Since our console application was not intended to do anything outside of our testing, I am not going to mark it with code coverage because we really don't care about what's happening here. This is kind of our playing around to get things working, so we can just exclude this from coverage. And I am going to get rid of this line because I don't like the gray unneeded usings. And then we should be good with everything else. Oh, don't need you anymore either. There we go. I'm going to ignore the other grays. That's because it says program is never instantiated, but .NET does instantiate it. It always forgets about that. Same thing here with arguments. I could remove them or not. This one we'll leave because that's some clarity as to what's happening when we built it out. So if we run it, everything should be good, and we should be at the mythical 100% code coverage only because I excluded a bunch of stuff. Still running. What happened? Did I hit run? Huh. Is there a piece of code in here I forgot about? One of it's complaining because this is static. It should have caught the whole class. Oh, because this is a static. No, it should have caught it. Don't know why. It's complaining about both the main and the get valid, probably because they're static methods, not the overall class. So I probably have to do that and do that. Now run it. If this works, I hit the mythical 100, I will commit it. Huh. Must be a issue with the code. Huh. That's weird. I have to look this up. Let's see. Writer code coverage static main. Ooh, that's probably not good because coverage can't cover the public static void method. Oh, it's Java. That's Java. Unit test coverage code methods, how to drive a main method. I don't know. Writer code coverage static main. Nothing in the first set of results. Let's see if I do this and change it to Google, see if I get better results. I really don't like Google's new interface, or maybe new to me. Run static message from gutter. I don't see it. I'll do some more research on it afterwards to see if it what the deal is. But again, it's not important. I have clear signs in here that I want to exclude it. It might make sense later on when we do our build process to make sure our code coverage is at over 87%, but at that point we will probably delete the console application from it. For now, we're just going to ignore it and hope that everything went hunky-dory. You want to follow along again at some point once the video is posted, there'll be a link for it right around here. I'm going to just put a reference to Microsoft Fake since we didn't get a chance to cover it in the former stream. I'm going to have to relook at this point because we actually did a bunch of that. We're going to probably skip the data persistence layer since we already have one and go straight into creating a new web API. That's all I got for today. Sam, if you're still there, it was great chatting with you. Say hi to Coated Chicken for me. See you on stream soon. Everyone I know is offline. I got no one to ship them to. So let's go with